attended. We are here this evening with Communities United for Action to hear and talk about what does redistricting have to do with me. Redistricting as it relates to voting, one of our very important rights. My name is Clark Beck. I'm a member of the board at Communities United for Action. We have some other people from Communities United here that are going to play major roles. Mary Metzmeyer is going to play a major role, and Allison is going to also play a major role with some technical things that are going on with our Zoom presentation. So, first of all, let's talk about trying to stay muted unless you're talking while the presentation is going on, because there can be a lot of background noise, which makes it difficult to hear our speakers. We're gonna cover a lot this evening. I've seen part of the presentation and it's very good, and it has a lot of detailed information in it. You can ask questions in the chat if you're on Zoom, and I believe that our guest speakers, if you have a very important question, I think they said it's okay to sort of chime in and they'll stop and try to address your question. We'll let them talk a little more about how they're going to present to us when we introduce them. So I guess it's time for the introduction now. We're happy to have someone here from Common Cause. We are happy to have someone here from League of Women Voters of the Cincinnati area and the Fair District Speakers Bureau. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us whatever they feel is necessary for us to know who they are. And I guess we'd like to have, since both of their names start with C, first name, let's Catherine and then Christine. And if anyone else is around, we'll ask them to go also. So,
hi, everybody. Thank you so much for including me in today's discussion about redistricting reform. It's so important to look at this manipulation of district lines and how it affects our vote. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what's going to happen this year. And with that, I will hand it off to Christine to introduce herself.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Carli. I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters, and I'm a volunteer for the Speakers Bureau of Fair Districts, Ohio. And so tonight, Catherine and I are going to take you through a brief presentation to kind of explain what redistricting is and what's going on now, and what you can do to help us take action to make sure that we have fair districts going forward in the state of Ohio. So anyway, it's a great privilege to be with you all tonight. I have a huge amount of respect for your organization and the work you're doing in our community. So thank you very much. This is great. So let me just dive right in. So the League of Women Voters and Common Cause Ohio have been partners for decades in the fight for fair districts in Ohio. We have partnered with a lot of nonpartisan organizations to form Fair Districts Ohio. And over the past decade or so have really worked to inform voters about the importance of redistricting and actually take a stand in changing the rules so that we can have fairer districts, hopefully going forward in this next map-making process. Okay, next slide, please. So the takeaway for today, this is the main thing we're going to talk about, is the fact that Ohioans want fair maps. So back in 2015, we voted as a group of voters in the state of Ohio, and in 2018 for redistricting reform. And it passed in both of those elections with more than 70% of the vote. So it passed in all of Ohio's 88 counties. So this is something that all Ohioans want. It's a bipartisan, overwhelmingly popular thing that Ohioans are asking for. So what's happening now is our census data is coming forward, and it's time to redraw the districts in the state of Ohio. And so we need people to know that we're looking at that process. The map makers know that we as citizens are paying attention and we're participating in the process. So what happens is every 10 years we have the census and we make new maps for Ohio congressional districts as well as for the Ohio General Assembly. And what you're looking at here is basically the House of Representatives and the idea of apportionment. So according to the US Constitution, we have 435 roughly equal congressional districts. And this is kind of what that's showing here. Each state has at least one representative, as we know, but the process of distributing the remaining 385 seats is called apportionment. So today in the United States, each House seat represents about 711,000 people, and roughly the same amount. So what you would need to know about this is but what we know now is that in the state of Ohio, we've actually lost some population. So even though the census results aren't final, we know we're going to lose one House seat and go from 16 seats to 15 seats. Okay, next slide. So what we're looking at here is the Ohio House and Senate districts. Now, according to our Ohio state constitution, we have 99 representatives and 33 senators, and no reapportionment is required. Those numbers remain steady. Okay, so we can go ahead, next slide. So what is redistricting? It's when we redraw the districts so that each district has roughly the same number of residents. It's pretty basic. And it's done every 10 years, like I said, for US congressional districts, state and House and Senate districts, and as well as for some smaller districts like city council and things like that. The US Constitution requires that political districts of the same type have roughly the same number of residents. And so this is called the principle of population equality. I'm kind of going through this kind of civics lesson because all of this matters as we go forward in redrawing our districts, this time with the new rules we've put in place. So I'm kind of giving you a quick overview here so that it makes sense going forward. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of where the rubber hits the road for our presentation tonight. And this illustration kind of demonstrates the power that's involved when we're redrawing district lines. And the point is that it matters who is drawing those lines and what, if any, rules are in place when those lines are drawn. So this is kind of where gerrymandering happens and unfair representation can happen. So we've got this kind of a cats and dogs scenario happening. So let's imagine that the state of Ohio had 20 cats and 30 dogs in it. So perfect representation for those cats versus dogs would be what's shown in that second column there. So, but what happens when the cats or the dogs control the process, the representation can shift pretty dramatically. So let's say the dogs were in charge of drawing the district lines. They can crack the opposition by putting a small number of cats in each district. So that's what the third column looks like. So then you see that the dogs have all the districts and the cats don't have any representation at all, even though they have a mild minority, but they're not having any representation at all. So what would happen if the cats were in charge of drawing the districts? That's the final column there. If the cats control that process, they can pack the dogs into two districts and end up winning a majority of districts, even though they are in the minority in the state where they live. So these terms, cracking and packing, are two tools that unfair mapmakers can use to gerrymander a state. Okay, so what is bad about gerrymandering? Well, it's been with us since the beginning of the Republic, but what's happening is it's getting worse over time as technology is taking hold and mapping programs are becoming stronger and faster and more sophisticated. So I think we all know gerrymandering can lead to districts that are uncompetitive, and that leads to things like voter apathy because people aren't going to turn out if they don't feel like their vote matters. The other thing that's happening, and we've seen this recently in the news, is primaries are becoming the real election. So candidates who are afraid of getting, quote, primaried are kind of catering or pandering to voters that are in the more extremes so that they can survive that, that process. And then that leads to the radicalization of candidates, extreme legislation, and basically a stalemate in Congress where there's a total inability for people to cross lines and work across the aisle. So gerrymandering is just bad for government, healthy government in general. Okay, so we're looking at Ohio's congressional map as it looks today after the districts were drawn in 2011. And as you can see, each district kind of looks like a jagged pieces of a puzzle. This is kind of classic gerrymandering right here. These districts were not drawn to be fair. They were drawn to affect a very deliberate outcome. So back in 2011, they were redrawn to have 12 Republican seats and 4 Democratic seats. And so what we've seen since then is even during elections where there were a wave Democratic year or a wave Republican year, not a single district in Ohio has shifted from one to the other. And these outcomes really hurt all voters, because when candidates and lawmakers know that they're assured to win their seat, they don't need to listen to the concerns of the citizens. So ensuring a map like this could only be done by very deliberate gerrymandering practices. And these districts, as they look now, the shapes of them are it's just classic gerrymandering. The good news is that it's time to make these maps again going forward as soon as we get our census data. So stay tuned, because we're going to show you how you can help us. Now this slide also, this slide was really to help you see how Ohio's electorate is broken out and how the voters are not represented proportionally at all. So since the last time our districts were drawn, both congressional and state legislative districts have been consistently unfair in their terms of representation. So if you add up all of the Democratic votes and Republican votes, congressional Republicans got 55% of the votes, yet they have 75% of the seats. Ohio's state legislators took 64% of the seats, but they only have 55% of the votes. So our representation is not at all proportional right now in the state of Ohio. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so just to show you a really drastic example of what gerrymandering looks like today in Ohio, this is Congressional District 9, affectionately known as the Snake on the Lake. It's the northernmost part of Ohio, and it sprawls 96 miles all the way from Toledo east to Columbus. Now, this district is represented by Marcy Kaptur, and she's admitted that being in this district has created new challenges for her. And she spent decades representing Northwestern Ohio, because after 2011, her district now included parts of Cleveland, and then to reach all of her constituents, she's forced to drive along this narrow region, 96 miles, and try to prioritize the needs of people with very different bases of employment, rural versus urban needs, manufacturing versus farming, and it makes it virtually impossible for her to prioritize in a meaningful way in terms of asking Congress for support for her district. So this is an example of that, how it doesn't serve good government to have districts so gerrymandered. Now, to bring it down to the local level, we're looking at District 1 right now. This is Steve Shabat's district. So if you all remember, prior to 2010, this was a pretty competitive district, and it could flip very easily back and forth between Democrat and Republican. But in 2010, Hamilton County had about 802,000 residents, so that exceeded that 711,000 resident number. So we knew that Hamilton County would be split up, but how it was split up is what matters here. And this is a classic case of cracking. So what the mapmakers did to ensure a deliberate outcome is they pretty much cracked the Democratic voting base, which tends to be in the city of Cincinnati, and they split the district. And then the second thing they did is they included the voters, a huge chunk of Warren County, into District 1, which tends to lead more Republican. So after that was in place, this has been Steve Shabat's district ever since. And even though we've had wave years of Democrat versus Republicans, this district has never shifted at all. And so just to show you kind of to give you a kind of an on the ground view of what a cracked district looks like. If you're at a Xavier basketball game and you're courtside, you're in District 1. The minute you leave the building and walk to your car, you're in District 2. So that line divides not only the city of Norwood, it divides the city of Cincinnati, it divides the communities that should be made contiguous so that they have a more meaningful voice and representation. They're all split. So it's an example really of how damaging gerrymandering can be to representation. Okay, next slide. All right, from here, Catherine's going to take over and take the presentation from here.
And of course, first of all, I have to figure out how to unmute. Well, thank you, Christine. one of the things that, when we think about gerrymandering, we need to be really that the manipulation of the district lines ends up being the manipulation of election. And the manipulation of the elections ends up being the manipulation of public policy. And so, yeah, I think the title of this really had to do with like, how does this connect to you? And so as we're going through and we're thinking about, something that happens every 10 years behind closed doors can have meaningful impacts. And, when the people who actually draw these district lines, these voting districts, have more to say about who gets elected than we do, we know that there is genuinely a problem. And so, one of the things that we look at as you're looking at here, I wanted to highlight, you see Franklin County, which is this yellow district that looks like a Rorschach ink blot. So it's a perfect example of the packing where you put all the Democrats together you possibly can. And then you have the 15th Congressional District that goes all the way around. And it actually starts in Upper Arlington, where Ohio State University is. And it works its way all the way to Athens, where Ohio University is. So as you think about, that is the example of cracking. And so like, I think this is the kind of perfect example. And I also think it's really useful for us to think about, we know that gerrymander, it came about because of, it was a political cartoon from 1812. So we know that manipulation of those district lines has been going on for a really long time. But we all need to realize that because of the computers, things have gotten significantly worse. And that, as we go forward, we know that things will get a lot worse. However, and you'll notice however, Ohioans worked for a terribly long time on actually addressing gerrymandering. That notion that, we have been a swing state for year after year. It was very clear when you have the kinds of shenanigans that happened with our district lines, that we actually really needed to do something about it. I do want to highlight, as we're thinking about the fact that we managed to pass state legislative redistricting reform in 2015, and we passed congressional redistricting reform in 2018, that the first time we actually had a citizens initiative to address redistricting reform was in 1981. And in 1981, the Democrats were in charge, and the Democrats were the ones who defeated it. So one of the things that, is really painful about this is whoever has the power of the pen or the power to draw those district lines, they, take advantage of it. And so we have states like Ohio that have been gerrymandered by Republicans for a long time. And you have states like Illinois that have been gerrymandered by Democrats for a really long time. And so this is a partisan issue in that this is all this arm wrestling and wrangling about who's going to be in power and who are we going to send to DC to represent us. But at the end of the day, this is not a Democratic issue. It's a big D Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. This is an issue in which voters' power, our ability to make choice, is put in jeopardy. And that is why, people came together for many different times. Some of you who are here today may have collected signatures in 2005, and we got our butts kicked. And then in 2012, we collected signatures and we got our butts kicked. One of the things that I think that we should be really looking at is, because gerrymandering and map making happens every 10 years, this has been a really long fight. But because of the persistence of people all over the state who said, this is a voting rights issue, we want to make sure that we have good elections, and we want to make sure that we get to select the person of our choice, we're going into the map making this year with new rules. Now, there are different rules for Ohio House and Ohio Senate, but here's some that are, for both the Ohio House, Ohio Senate, and for Congress. And so first of all, there's a real focus on making sure that the districts are compact. There's also focus on making sure that they are contiguous and continuous. And so one of the things that we need to think about is like, well, how do you talk about compactness? And our reform, the one that was passed by Ohio voters, really focused on how do we talk about keeping communities together? Like, what is a community? How do we talk about communities? And what was decided is there would be a focus on keeping, counties and cities and political subdivisions whole. And so as we look at the reforms, there's a real focus on transparency, but there's a real focus on keeping those political subdivisions together as much as possible. And so I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we're going to be looking at as we look at the map makers coming together. There's specific rules. Now, Christine identified that there are 99 Ohio House seats and there are 33 Ohio Senate seats. Now, what is interesting is they nest, meaning every Senate seat actually has 3 House seats. There is a rule that says you can't draw a plan to favor or disfavor one political party for these Ohio House and Ohio Senate seats. Now, what's interesting about that is when they say plan, they actually mean map. But when you hear somebody, announcing, hey, we have a new plan when we get into the fall of this year, what they're talking about is the map. But there is a real clear rule that you can't gerrymander. And then it's backed up with saying that we need representational fairness. Now, we are the only state in the nation that actually has a rule that focuses on representational fairness. And this is the result of the fact that our reform efforts were always fueled by political scientists and professors. And some of our best advocates, basically are professor emerituses and they're political scientists from all over the state. Dick Gunther, who is a professor at Ohio State University at this point, just a professor emeritus, he had this notion that we should actually have what's called representational fairness, which means that if, in fact, we are a state that's 55% Republican, 45% Democratic, well, that's the way the district should look. 55% of them are likely to lean to Republicans, 45% of them are likely to lean to Democrats. And that at the end of the day, by having that requirement, it will in fact create fairer maps in the end, and we're more likely to have competitive districts. Now, the Ohio Redistricting Commission, these are the folks who are going to draw the Ohio House and Ohio Senate districts. Now, you'll notice the list here includes the governor, the auditor, secretary of state. Now, the appointments from the state legislators, the leadership in both the Ohio House and Senate, one's a Democrat, one's a Republican from both chambers, Ohio House and Ohio Senate. And do is look here, and it's pretty clear, wow, there are way more Republicans than there actually are Democrats. Now, this is important because at the end of the day, you're always going to have more of one party than the other. And what happens is there's 7 members, 4 members need to approve a map. However, they can't just be any 4 members. 2 of them have to be Republicans and 2 of them have to be Democrats. And the way to think about this is the Democrats get a veto, or whoever it is that's not in power at the time of the map making gets to do a thumbs down on maps. And so it's a way to make sure that we actually have bipartisan map making. Now, the congressional rules are not quite as tough because, for the Ohio House and Senate, there's this focus on representational fairness, a real focus on you keep the county whole, the city whole, the township whole. For Congress, we actually had a real struggle to get the state legislature to actually pay attention. Many of you may have collected signatures or signed petitions in 2017 because after 2015, we thought, okay, you passed state legislative redistricting reform. You understood that it was important. Why is it you're not acting on congressional redistricting reform? And so people all over Ohio came together, fair districts equal fair elections. We came together, we collected 200,000 signatures, and finally, the State House started to pay attention. And what they proposed is not exactly what we might have wanted, but it does focus on some really key important things. So, one of the things that never goes well in government is if you can do them in secret. Now, things that are quiet or secret aren't necessarily bad, but if you don't have transparency in government, you don't have accountability. And so the first piece that we built in is making sure that there was good transparency, and that all of us would have the tools so that we could make our own maps or our own districts so that we could participate and testify. The other thing that we focused on is, okay, well, how do you address the worst aspects of gerrymandering? Well, you limit the number of splits on political subdivisions. So this gets into saying, okay, well, congressional districts are slightly different than the Ohio House district. So the difference of 99, smaller districts versus, in this case, going forward, 15. So the congressional districts really focus on keeping counties whole. And so here you can see Cuyahoga County. So this is Cleveland, which is split into 4 different congressional districts. Summit County, where Akron is also split into 4 different congressional districts. And so we came up, with, all right, through a lot of negotiation. And so I often say to people, you need to know that you can see the sausage being made in this, that you can see the negotiations going on. But in fact, there's a requirement that 65 of the 88 counties must be contained entirely in one district. And the way to understand it is you can't split 65 counties. They need to remain whole. And then this is important because, of course, some of them can be split. And when we're thinking about why are districts split in the first place? It primarily has to do with population. That, one person, one vote is something that people will often say. And that comes down to a case from the 1960s where what was happening is they were, state legislatures, including Ohio, were creating these crazy districts where you would have urban districts that didn't have a lot of population, and you'd have rural districts, you'd have a lot of population. I'm saying this wrong. You'd have a lot of population in the urban districts. They would be the same size, but the rural districts wouldn't have very many people in it. So it wasn't fair. It was like diluting the vote of the people who lived in cities. And of course, at the end of the day, diluting the vote of Democrats, African Americans, it was a real challenge. And that's why we have one person, one vote. And yet, keeping our communities together is a value that I think we all hold, that notion of we want the person that we send to the State House or the person that we send to Washington to actually represent the voters of our community. And that's why these maps, these district lines make such a difference. And so I just wanted to highlight one of the other rules that is really essential, especially for Hamilton County, that if you have enough population, you have to have a district wholly in the county. Now, you know that this is still a challenge, and it will be very important to hold their feet to the fire so they, in fact, create district lines that keep the communities in Hamilton County together in a way that will give good representation. Now, I also wanted to highlight that there were splits, crazy splits in, I talked about Cuyahoga County, but you think of Mercer County that's north of you on the Indiana border. Selena's there. It's just, it's very rural area, and it's in 3 different congressional districts. If you're familiar with Jim Jordan's Duck District, it's where the tail feathers are for Jim Jordan's district. Now, remember I told you that this was a compromise? So the way to understand this is there was a real focus in the state legislature on how is it, in fact, we're going to do congressional maps. We want it to be bipartisan, but it's just really, really hard to actually be bipartisan. And so they said, well, let's identify what we'd really like to be. We want to have a supermajority support for maps, and we want 50% from the 2 largest parties. In other words, they want 50% from Democrats, 50% of the votes from Republicans. And then they said, well, are we actually going to be able to do that? That's actually a really high thing. I mean, that's a lot to ask for. And they thought, okay, it's possible we can't do this. And if we can't do this, what we're going to do is we're in fact going to give this map making to the Ohio Redistricting Commission. So governor, auditor, secretary of state, 2 members of the Ohio House, Dem, Republican, 2 members of the Ohio Senate, Dem, Republican. We're going to give it to them. Remember, 4-7 votes, including 2 members of both political parties. And then they thought, well, giving it to a different group of people to do this task may get the job done, or they may not be able to come together and do this. And so then if they cannot do it, it goes back to the state legislature. And the state legislature still has to have a supermajority, 60%, but only a third of the Dems and a third of the Republicans would be required. Now, if they still can't get their act together, then they have the option of doing a 4-year map. Now, a 4-year map is unattractive to the candidates who are going to, the candidates are going to have to figure out where they're going to live, and are they going to have to change things around, and what is my district? And I finally got used to it. So the 4-year map is just not real attractive to candidates, not attractive to the parties. It's not attractive to the public either, right? And they said, okay, well, if it's not attractive, but it could be attractive to one political party or the other, who might game it out. Who, if we do a 4-year map and we only have to have a simple majority, ooh, we can do anything we want. Well, no, they can't do anything they want. What is in the Ohio Constitution is they have additional requirements. First of all of a sudden, as opposed to having to keep some counties whole and rules about counties, all of a sudden the rules are changed. They have to keep counties whole, cities whole, and townships whole as much as possible. So the rules get tighter. They also get tighter, and there is a requirement that they cannot draw district lines to favor or disfavor an incumbent. So think about that. That tightens things on the major party, so that they can't just do willy-nilly whatever the hell they want to. They have rules. And then finally, they have to put into writing every single decision they make. So if they split a community, they have to explain why they did it, which makes it much easier to actually go to court. Now, as you're looking at this whole thing and saying, okay, I can see the real challenge of how do you get to bipartisan map making, and what role do we as people who are not in the legislature, what can we actually do? Well, clearly we can ask our legislators to focus on voters, ask our legislators to do the right thing. But the other thing that we can focus on is the governor actually has to sign these maps, right? The ones that are created by the state legislature, the governor signs, meaning we can referendum them, meaning that if they are genuinely terrible, we can actually collect signatures and put a map before a vote of the people. Now, the next thing is you're thinking about, well, wait a second, how exactly will this work? It will create some difficulties for the upcoming primary. And what happened in 2011 is when a citizen began to collect signatures, they actually improved the map. Now, you may look at our current map and think, how in the world is this an improvement? But it actually was. And so as we think about a referendum, it is a way to put pressure on the state legislature, and we should definitely consider it if the maps are not appropriate. The other thing to think about is that we can actually take them to court. And I think that's actually an important step as we're thinking about how do you hold these folks accountable. We can put pressure on them as they're legislating. We can do a referendum, and we can actually take action because we embedded in specific rules into the Ohio Constitution with the goal of actually participating in meaningful elections. And so, my guess is, we'll have more questions. I did want to highlight, I can't see the chat. And so if you have a bunch of questions, raise your hand, just let me know. I did want to hit two important things about the map making that isn't related to the rules, but I think that they're important for you all to know. One, the census is late. Every 10 years they do the census, we go through apportionment the way that Christine talked about. We now know we have 15 seats, or we have 15 districts, or we'll have 15 people that we send off to Washington. But we do not have the data to make these districts. And in 2011, we had that data in April. We will not get the data, and in this case, it's what they call legacy data format. We will not get that until August 16th. Now all you have to do is go back and think about the timeline that I just had on that other slide that had, September deadline and had an October deadline and a November deadline, to think, oh, wait a second. If we're not getting this data until August, we may have some real challenges in getting meaningful public participation. We may have some real challenges in the map making. And in fact, it's impossible to do the state legislative districts. They are due September 1st or September 15th. So we know that there is no way we are going to be able to meet the deadlines that are in the Ohio Constitution. Now, clearly the deadlines in the Ohio Constitution are not the important part of the changes that make for good maps. They were put in there to make sure everybody gets their job done. It's like, hey, there's a test, you need to know the day that the test comes up so that you get everything organized and done in time. But it is likely that this will need to go to the Ohio Supreme Court to establish a new timeline for all of this. And it's a bit of a challenge how this will all come together. And we do know that, the pandemic impacted a ton of different things. But as we go into this map making, we need to be really focused on how is it we can create a good timeline that's sensible and gets things done in time, but also allows enough time for public deliberation so that we can be very clear what it is that we want when it comes to the map making. Now, for many of you, you may have gone through this entire thing and you say, well, wait a second. How in the world is it constitutional that you can manipulate our votes so dramatically that it impacts election after election after election for a decade? So we did want to highlight that in 2019, there were two different court cases. So one was called Russo v. Common Cause, and it was about a Republican gerrymander in North Carolina. And then the other one was called Lamont v. Benesek. And that was a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland. And these two cases basically went to the US Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court essentially said, yeah, you're really right. Gerrymandering isn't good. Gerrymandering is real. And unfortunately, we can't actually do anything about it. In fact, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, writing for the majority, essentially said that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts, meaning it may be unconstitutional, but we can't handle it. And in fact, Elena Kagan said, well, wait a second, this is the only time we basically are like, oh, we just wash our hands of it. The other nonsense that the Chief Justice said is that the state legislatures should address gerrymandering. Now, we know as Ohioans, we have a citizens initiative. So we were able to put pressure repeatedly on the state legislature to act so that Ohioans would have new rules. But there are plenty of states, North Carolina, Indiana, you just think of your neighbors, Pennsylvania, that do not, in fact, have the ability to actually collect signatures to put an agenda before the legislature. So just incredible nonsense. And it reminds me a little of the way I feel about Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission. What planet are you on? Do you not understand how this is impacting, all of our votes? And how is it that the courts do not step in to address the manipulation of the votes? Now, I did want to highlight, there's some things that you can do today.
So Catherine, I'm going to interrupt you real quick because we have a question in the chat, and I think probably a lot of people are thinking this. Someone wants to know who are the us we're being asked to help. So if you could just talk a little bit about who is in this effort.
Okay, so one of the best ways to think about this is that at the very beginning, there was a slide that Christine shared. And so we're fair districts, fair elections. We call ourselves this year just fair districts. It's funny, we started as the Ohio Campaign for Accountable Redistricting. And it's that notion of we came together to do fair districts. And so key partners are League of Women Voters, Ohio Council of Churches, ACLU Ohio, Common Cause, A. Philip Randolph, you know, a variety of different organizations have come together. So that's what Fair Districts is. But what I would highlight when I say us, I really am encouraging us all to think about this as we are voters and we want to participate in truly meaningful elections. And so, yeah, this effort that we're putting together to really put pressure on the State House is coming from voters and citizens all over Ohio. Christine, did you have anything you wanted to add about that?
No, I think that's a good explanation. I do think it's incumbent on all of us as citizens, actually. So when we say us, you know, it's everyone. It's you. It's letting your neighbor know, informing people who will pay attention and take action. I mean, that's really what it's going to take to make sure that this is done as fairly as possible. As Catherine said, it's like these rules are like guardrails. So we've got these guardrails in place, but it doesn't mean that all of these actions are going to be followed without, you know, public input and accountability. And so it's really a statewide effort. It has to be.
And just to be clear, it's not really aligned with any particular party or any particular philosophy. It's just trying to get our government in shape.
Well, clearly, you know, all of the people who participate in this may have, you know, they may bend to the left or the right, but this is not, you know, we're not Republicans or Democrats. The focus really is on making sure that all voters can participate in meaningful elections.
Thank you.
And it looks like we have a question. And sadly, I don't know how to say your name.
It's all right, Kathleen.
So I hate to say people's names wrong. How do you say your name?
Rukaya.
Rukaya. Okay. Thank you.
We had a brief meeting. You and I met once, and at about a year. No, it was before COVID, and I was very interested in this topic. And I listened to part of what you were saying when I met you a few years ago, but nobody else was really paying attention. You were trying to get them to understand. It just didn't seem to resonate. And then I lost track of you. So it was very good to see you again. We didn't talk. I merely listened. I was sitting up front and just trying to listen to what you were saying, because I, in 2010, saw this nightmare that happened. And I went, are you crazy people? What have you let happen here? And of course, look at what we're dealing with now. So I was always curious of, how do we get involved? It's not like we all understand this. I'm still trying to understand how they let this happen. But at the same time, if we're talking about they're in office and they're making these decisions behind closed doors, how are we going to, how? Please tell me how.
So I do think the rules for the 2021 map making that focus on doing things in a more transparent fashion, including more public hearings, and more importantly, including public hearings after maps have been proposed. So, because this is what they did in 2011, they actually did this in 2001 too. They held public hearings during the summer, and then they rolled out maps, and then they voted on them the next day. No, and this will be different in 2021. They will have, there's a requirement to have hearings following the time that they actually propose a map, so that we will have the opportunity to put pressure on them and participate in a kind of dialogue with them, so they better understand why these maps are not good. I also think the fact that we have gotten a lot smarter about something that is, let's face it, super duper nerdy. Not everybody's gonna want to work on redistricting, but they do know that they actually want to participate in meaningful elections. And we know that our democracy, you know, is not going to work unless we actually have fairer rules. And so, as we go into this, I think those rules that focus on keeping communities whole will actually get at the worst aspects of gerrymandering. I think the fact that we have the courts where we can take action and we have the ability to do a referendum gives us another tool to hold them accountable. I also think, how can I put this? It's been like a snowball. Like, I actually started working on redistricting reform in the 90s, meaning I've been at this for a very long, it's funny, those days where you feel a little old. I've been at this a really long time. And what I would say is, especially in the 90s, when I would talk about this, people would just be like, thank you, Catherine. And they would just not pay attention. Like, they would just be like, oh, that's nice. It's nice you're doing that. And I do feel like, even though people get that they don't want to do the kind of deep dive they do get that they want to take action, and they do get that for their vote to be meaningful, we do have to put pressure on the legislature to actually create good maps, and we have to put pressure on the Ohio Redistricting Commission.
Where are these meetings going to be held? How are we going to know about them? I mean, I do have some young people who really want to be able to not necessarily join a group or anything, but be able to come out and say, or go to the meetings and voice their opinion or vote or whatever it is we end up being able to do. So when will we know about them? Where will they be held? Just.
So right now, the Ohio Redistricting Commission has not been convened. And in fact, the thing that I have here, tell Governor DeWine to convene the Ohio Redistricting Commission. This would be a good beginning for, if we can actually get them to convene, they have to do it in public. That is state law requirement. They have to do it in public. They will then have to set up a schedule. We're really pushing on the governor to convene because we know we're getting this data late, and we know there are new rules. And the other thing that I think is really important is we know that the one district, which is Congressional District 11, which is up in Cleveland, which has been a majority minority district for years, is not likely to have the 50% voting age population of African Americans that it did 10 years ago. So we need conversations and have experts give us more information about the Voting Rights Act. So this is the first step, the step of like, let's nudge the governor to convene the Ohio Redistricting Commission so that we can start these hearings. There is a requirement to do these hearings around Ohio, meaning that yes, many of them will be at the State House, but there is a requirement to have them not only at the State House. So what they did in 2011, I did 2001 and 2011. I attended the hearings that they had. So in 2001, I remember the ones at the State House. I don't remember all the different places, but 2011, there was one that was at Xavier University, which is one of the reasons it's on the slide. That was there at Xavier University. There was also one that was at the University of Dayton in Dayton. There was one that was in a church and a rec space in Lima, Ohio, so Allen County. There was a hearing, there was a hearing in Toledo, there was a hearing in Cleveland, there was one in the Mahoning Valley, and there was one in Portsmouth. And so that's the way it should be. Like, now, what happened in 2011 is they did them as like a dog and pony show. Mm-hmm. But we need to do what we can so that they aren't dog and pony shows, so that they have meaning, and we can put pressure on our elected officials. So they have the rules that are guardrails, and then we really encourage them to mind their P's and Q's. And it would be great. If you know people that want to participate, as soon as these things get going, I will make sure to share this information. And you'll notice here, this says fairdistrictsohio.org. That's our website. Mm-hmm. You'll see this picture because we're also starting to distribute yard signs. So the yard signs arrived today, and beginning next week, we will be distributing them in Cincinnati. So, that notion of like, we need to take this from people that are nerdy like me, and actually get it out there so that people understand that the manipulation of the district lines is the manipulation of our vote, and we don't really want to be manipulated.
Right. Okay. All right. I appreciate you absolutely giving me at least direction, and would love one of those maps on my lawn. I've got a daughter who probably would jump in with both feet with this. And so she's the one that's got the connections to the younger people of her age group in the 30s, 40s, 50s who want to really, they're like appalled by all of this. So I told her I'd get back to her once I listened to all of this. And it was another reason why I had to clear my schedule and get here to this meeting. So
Well, we're so glad you did.
so
I did want to highlight that you can also order Fair Districts postcards. You know, one of the things I do every day is I send out Fair Districts postcards, which is essentially, you know, letting map makers know that you are paying attention. And they look like this, and on the other side they highlight that in fact, redistricting reform won in all 88 counties. Christine is actually showing the other side of a postcard. So there are different ways to get involved. And I wanted to highlight that, you know, Christine is one of the speakers, and we do this kind of thing. You know, this is my third one this week, and, you know, talking to people. And it would be great to have people from all over Ohio talking about redistricting and talking about what we can do so that we can create a more meaningful democracy and more robust elections. This is the very final slide, and I did want to highlight, I'm going to send these slides to Allison so that she can send them to you so that you can go through them, because, you know, it's like anything, you know, it takes a little while to take this all in. I did want to highlight, you know, that the Fair Districts Ohio 2021 at gmail.com, please touch base. Now, I will highlight that different people answer this. What happens is that Mia Lewis, who is my coworker, is the person who usually answers. And every once in a while, you'll notice that Tiffany's answering them or I'm answering them. So don't be surprised. This is one that we kind of share. I also think that it is interesting, and I did this bit.ly for the LSC Ohio redistricting, because it is interesting what it is that the state legislators are told about the rules. And they're accurate, but it's well worth, if you're the kind of person that wants to take a deep dive, I would highly encourage that. Now, Justin Levitt just recently was appointed special counsel to Biden, basically with a focus on voting rights. But Professor Justin Levitt created this thing that looks at everything redistricting. So if you are like somebody who really wants to take a deep dive, that bit.ly / Justin Levitt, take a look at basically what works your way through all the different things that has happened with redistricting in Ohio. And then the Brennan Center for Justice does some really interesting research on redistricting and does some comparisons in different states. And then our website is there, fairdistrictsohio.org. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that people can ask all sorts of questions.
So it is time for questions if you still have them. I just want to say I really enjoyed this presentation. It gave so much information on this huge issue. Voting is so important, and the outcome of who is in office is going to make a difference. So, and I think the most important thing I've heard, it needs to be fair. So we're open for questions. We've got some time if anyone has questions.
So, and remember, everybody was muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. And if you're on your phone, do that with *6 if nothing else is working.
So I have a comment. I put many of those links in the chat, and I learned this new trick. If you go to the 3 dots in the chat, you can save the chat, so you don't have to scribble them all down. You can just save it. Greg,
Well,
did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question, but Mary just answered it. Thank you.
So I have another question. Who here is angry about this crazy gerrymandering stuff?
Wow.
I am outraged, I gotta say.
I
And
myself am. Yes.
aren't you?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that we don't get to vote for the people that some people just automatically are never going to win, right? Because of how their district is drawn. And like, who does that? China, right? Like, I mean, so I am outraged by this, but I also am a little confused about how I tell my grandma about it. Like, there was a lot of good information, but I am just like trying to figure out how to say it in a really simple way. And like, Catherine, that system that you went through about here's the first thing, if that doesn't work, we're going to do the second thing, and then we're going to do the third thing. I'm like, wow. So what is a really simple way to tell that to my grandma or to my 84-year-old neighbor across the street? How do I do that?
The way that I always talk about it, and I think that we're all struggling to think about the best way to talk about something that happens every 10 years behind closed doors and is about map making. But the thing that I think is really clear is that the manipulation of the district lines is up being the manipulation of our vote. And we are not participating in truly meaningful elections. And we want to participate in fair elections that are meaningful. And folks don't necessarily need to know about the arm wrestling that goes at the State House. What they do need to know is we have to pay attention, because if we are not paying attention and reminding them that voters supported fair elections, they could, let's face it, all we have to do is think about the householder House Bill 6 craziness. We need them to really know that we actually want accountability. And that's the other way to talk about gerrymandering. If in fact you can manipulate those district lines so that who you want to get elected gets elected, how do we have any accountability? Who are these folks actually accountable to? It's not us. Is it their donors? Is it
the donors?
Well, are we choosing to go to as many forums that we can utilize in our wake, such as community centers, the Mason centers, and talk about this, but talk in that simple form that Mary was just asking? Are we doing this? Because what I found after what happened in 2010, and I tried to talk to people about it, it was, well, maybe it's in my favor, so maybe I should just let it see what happens. Because if it's in my favor, what do I care? That was the approach that I heard, which was very scary, because it wasn't about fairness. It was about what's in it for me. Am I going to be the one benefiting from it? And we're still facing that.
Yes.
So Catherine, no, my 2 C's, help us out here.
I do think one of the ways to make it so that it centers on people, they're like, well, if it so there's some people, it benefits my party, you may not ever get through to them. But for most people, they're going to say, oh, I want to have a meaningful vote. I don't want to participate in a rigged system. I want to have a meaningful voice and a meaningful vote. And so, that notion of hey, I want this to be set up for my party. There are going to be some people that don't believe in democracy. They just don't. But I firmly believe there are enough of us that care about this, and they believe in the power and promise of democracy. No, it hasn't come together so far. We know that. But we also know that if we don't actually establish good rules and we don't actually demand better, we're just going to keep living with this stuff. Now, what you were saying is about that notion of like, we actually need to talk to so many people, right? Like you start to think, oh my gosh, we have to talk to so many people. So one of the things that our Speakers Bureau has done is that we've divided up the areas. So Christine is helping take lead, in Cincinnati, and she can tell you a little bit about like what kind of activities the Speakers Bureau in Cincinnati is doing. It is a big job. So if any of you are at all interested in becoming a speaker, or if you think, oh, I want to give recommendations, or even I don't want to do what Catherine does, for example, but I'd be willing to be backup. I'd be willing to be there to highlight why I care about this and to push the conversation along. There are different ways to be part of that Speakers Bureau. Christine, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, our Speakers Bureau, we're willing to come and talk or do a Zoom call for any group. So if you're in this particular group tonight, but if there's other groups that you're involved in and you think that our presentation would be meaningful to that group, you can either email Fair Districts, there's a link there, or you can email me. I can put my email in the chat, and I can set up a time for us to come and present to other groups. And it can be large groups, it can be small groups. I mean, we could do your family if you wanted, but we're happy to get the word out to anybody who's willing to listen.
But excuse me, I have an organization called Citizens to Establish a Better Living Status. And what y'all are saying seems like coincide with what I'm trying to do. And I would be more than willing to get our organization going on with y'all.
That would be wonderful. We'd be happy to schedule that.
Okay. Well,
And also, there is next Thursday at the same time on this same channel, there's a discussion for CUFA members to decide what it is we want to do as CUFA, right? So I hope everyone who's on this call tonight will join us next week so we can get our strategy together.
Well, my name is Thelma Walker, and I am a grandmother, and I've been sitting here listening, and I'm at a learner's stage. I'll put it that way. It's so much information, but I'm still trying to understand a lot of it. So I'm just thinking, is there any literature or anything that I could find to help update my mind? Like I am the grandmother who needs some help.
So what we'll do is we'll send Allison information, including the slides and a little bit of what you can read that will maybe spark your imagination and information about different ways to get active so that you can think about how what you'd like to do.
Yes, because this is such a low down, underhanded way to rig an election.
Mm-hmm. And if anyone would want those slides printed out on paper, we can do that for you too. Just let us know. Yep.
I mean, I do. Please, I've got to get this to my daughter, so she's up in arms and ready to go, and I'm like, okay. So
Awesome.
right.
Florence, did you have a question?
I mean, I just like to thank the ladies, both of the Catherines, for presenting this, but also, I mean, what's happening in some of the states now with the voting rights, they're changing everything and making it harder, and they're saying, to make elections safer. Well, it was safe in 2020. There was no fraud or anything. I mean, these things that these governors are doing, I mean, this is a threat to our democracy.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, like we gotta get involved, and we gotta, go to the governors and of our state, the governor of our state, say, there was no fraud in 2020's election. So you don't need to change all this stuff to suppress voters' rights. That's all about it. Thank you.
This is Thelma again. It's like they can't win, so they're going to cheat.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
but they tell us to do the right thing, but we can see by their example, they don't do that.
I have a question also. I'm a newcomer and I'm just was listening, and as the lady was just saying, I would like some readable literature too, because I think it's horrible with voting suppression and the way things are changing in states or changing rules and everything to suppress the minority vote. So I would like some literature on that too, if I may.
Okay, we can get those for you.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Hello. I can't get over the way they did Cleveland. I mean, dividing that up into 4 different districts. Did anyone say anything when this happened? I mean, did the people have some kind of protest or say something about this? I mean, where's representation if you're always divided? I mean, I know that's their scheme, but what did the people say in Cleveland when this happened? I'm just wondering.
So I think the people in Cleveland are still feeling the impacts and are somehow still surprised. So if you remember that district that started in Toledo, Marcy Kaptur's district, that went to Cleveland, the reason that was created is because Dennis Kucinich, who was a Democratic congressperson, lived in Cleveland. So it essentially went from Marcy Kaptur's house to Dennis Kucinich's house. And it was a way essentially to take one of the Democrats out of the equation, right? If, one of the Democrats is going to win the primary. It makes it so that, yes, you can see how that works. And so, yes, I think folks are still really angry about, why would you do that? And they're still feeling the consequences. I think the challenge is that once things are cemented, meaning once they're approved, it's very hard. Now, one of the things that happened with the congressional maps is that it was in fact taken to federal court. And it was found to be unconstitutional at the district level. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, there's nothing you can do about it. And so one of the things that's so hard about redistricting is figuring out how to not just have good rules, but make sure they follow these new good rules. And then, what are the tools we have if they don't follow the good rules? Because you're absolutely right. The folks are still unhappy and angry about the craziness that happened in Cuyahoga County. And we should be.
Yes. People are angry.
Darlene, you had a question in the chat. I'm going to ask you to unmute so we could talk about that a little bit. Yes.
Okay, so
You're a little quiet though.
okay, let me see if I can talk a little loud. I wanted to know if you guys can go to what my question was. If you're willing to go to these talk shows and to these community council meetings, so you can let people know about what's going on.
I can tell you, I had reached out to WVXU a while back, and they had Catherine and Mia on WVXU's show. It was that afternoon show they have with Michael Monks, and that was a really great way to get out there. As far as the community council meetings go, I have the master list of community council president contacts, and Jean Henderson, my partner at Fair Districts, we've reached out to all of those community councils, and we have scheduled with a handful. But if you're a member of a community council and you would like us to present, please let your president know, because sometimes it takes a member of the community to get them to put us on the agenda. So please do that for us. But more talk shows. I definitely think getting on the airwaves is really effective. And so, Catherine's she's a great representative for the mission, and she's so knowledgeable, and she'd be wonderful on any talk show. So if you have a particular one that you would like to see Catherine and Mia present, that would be great.
I heard the WVXU interview. That was great.
Those are fun too. I think one of the things that's interesting is we have been, I would say most weeks I do some kind of interview, whether it's television or radio, but like last week I did one in Toledo, and the week before that it was in Cleveland. And so there are all sorts of different places, but it isn't that kind of drip, 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 that thing where everywhere you go, you're kind of seeing it or hearing about it, or maybe you don't know a lot about it, but it's kind of in the air. And so, when we start thinking about what are the ways that we can make our fight against gerrymandering be in the air, that demand for fair maps, to have it be sustained and something that all of us are taking seriously this year. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we need you.
I have a question. Where I live at, there's like one side, there are families, and on the other side of the street, there's another group of families. We have a church right down the street. So the people on the right side go to that church in order to vote. But the people on the left side, they have to like go down to Winton Road to vote. Is that a part of the same thing that you're talking about, like splitting people up for whatever purpose? And we don't really know why we had to go down to Winton. They just told us that you can't vote down here at this church right down here in the middle, which really makes no sense.
So one of the things that I know is everything is connected, but so like for example, if we don't have good representation at the State House that reflects us, then we're going to have voting rules that do not meet the needs of our community. And so you're going to end up with things like, not voting where one would expect to, or you might have rules that, for example, there's a discussion, Bill Seitz, who's from your neck of the woods, has recommended a variety of things that that would be helpful. Like, for example, automatic voter registration. So like other things, like you could apply to vote online, online you could say, I want to vote by mail. Like so there's some different things like that. But he's also talking about restricting drop boxes. He wants to restrict them to 10 days at the Board of Elections. And said crazy things like, Antifa and QAnon are going to throw cherry bombs in them. So one of the things that, as we think about kind of the challenges to voting or any environmental issue, or for that matter, if you're somebody who's concerned about gun violence, think about the difference between the number of people who support licensures and registrations and what we actually get coming out of our State House. You can just feel the impact of gerrymandering there. It just makes no sense. It makes no sense. They do not represent us.
I have a question. You said that you would like to set up a meeting. When and how can I do this?
So we threw in Christine's email is here in the chat, but the other thing that we'll do is I'll give information to Allison so we can sure to be connected.
Yes.
Does it make sense for you to work for you, Christine?
Yeah.
Sounds fine. Thank you.
I had another question. Is the census, after the census, is it a possibility I keep hearing that we may lose 2 seats. Is that possible, or
Yeah.
have they decided what they're about the census yet?
So we will lose 1 seat, meaning we're going down to 15. Now, we don't have all of the detailed numbers we need for the map making, but we do know that the apportionment numbers are 15.
So the likelihood of us making change may not happen until the next 10 years around, but we can start getting people stirred up about it so that they can.
So I do believe you have to take a long view on a lot of these things, but that notion of creating better district lines for the next decade, so 2022 to 2032, especially those state legislative district lines being better, means we're likely, one, to have really good maps when we get to 2031, which is hard to think about, but also to think about we're going to have more representative government, simply because we're going to have slightly better maps, especially the state legislative ones. Those are the ones that I think are going to make the biggest difference. Christine, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, I feel like I'm more optimistic than that. I do think it's not going to be perfect, but I do think that there's an accountability that's present now that, again, with our involvement, it will be better than it was. Mm-hmm. I really believe that, but we have to be there to bear witness to it and make sure that the rules are followed.
Okay. And I am guardedly optimistic. I think, I'm somebody who's worked on this for a really long time, and I'm tired. How's that? I'm tired, but I also do think we're getting closer to improving this. I think, one of the challenges is that a lot of redistricting reformers who've been doing this a while, we can get a little jaded. And so we need new blood, please.
You need good trouble. This is Thelma Walker again. Yes. I was making a statement because the lady asked the question earlier about her voting places being changed. Ours has been changed 3 times. This is the 3rd one. And we had very nice voting places, and they sent us out of the way, but I believe they do this to keep you from voting. To keep you from voting.
Well, at the very beginning, we were all voting at the same place. Mm-hmm. And then as the next vote came along, we went around Groesbeck and voted at that church. And then when the next election came around, we were all way down there to Winton Road voting, which made no sense. Nobody gave any explanation of why we had to move. It seemed as if, well, if you don't go there to vote, you can't vote because your name is not on the roster at another place. So that's the place that you go vote. And it's been like that for about maybe 4 to 5 years.
Well, I know at first where I am, we could go down the street and vote at, I think, the church on Roll Avenue. Mm-hmm. And after that, they moved us to the school and then after that, they moved us over off of Hopple. When I first went there, I just couldn't believe it. And we had to go through a entranceway that 2 people could not walk at the same time. And it's like you've got to either wait or just lean against the wall and hope you don't get squeezed. Then they finally opened up the front of it where you could walk in on that way, but it's like a no outlet street and you have to know where you're going to vote. But they moved us from very convenient places. And if you don't have a way to get around, you're in bad shape. Mm-hmm. Right. I think they did all this on purpose.
On purpose. So that not too many people would come and vote.
Somebody said, this sounds a whole lot like you got to cheat to win if you think that you can't win. So think about it, the people who are in charge of making these districts are also the people who generally are in charge of our voting laws. and the way that they administer elections. So, you know, they're cheating when they make the maps in this way. And then they're cheating when they do things like that, trying to spin you around and make you not know where you're supposed to go to vote.
Yep.
Or make it farther away from you. So if you don't have transportation, you don't go.
You don't go.
Well, when it comes to
That's a whole
minorities,
process.
that's always been a preference. They had always submitted that with the minorities. That's nothing new.
So there's a question in the chat. Is there any organization teaching government so lay people can understand how redistricting goes hand in hand?
Well, I would say the League of Women Voters has been doing that for a very long time. The other thing that I think is exciting this year is the Ohio Education Association has a redistricting competition for students, middle school through high school. And so I think they're trying to find ways to teach kids so that they understand how redistricting works and, you know, what the challenges are and what map making is about, because the structure of government is confusing.
I'll join that class.
Understand it.
Not just for kids, it should be for all of us.
Yes, that's why
Ladies,
I'm the
it was very
grandma.
nice meeting you, Catherine, and Chris. Catherine, actually, it was very nice seeing you again. And Christina, I'm looking forward to getting you and my family together, and the other people. But I've got to run, ladies. Sorry.
All right.
It's like,
Thank you.
and gentlemen, I'm not excluding the gentlemen. I just love my ladies.
Excuse us. Bless me.
when it
Your
comes
colors
to,
are beautiful.
I just raised my hand and the women are there, so sorry. But I love you guys, and we'll try to get out here and get this changed in every different way we can, okay?
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you.
This is Thelma again. I don't mean to change the subject, but I was talking to my neighbor and we've all been vaccinated where I live. And I asked her, had she registered in the Vaccinian lottery? And she said she hadn't. Anybody who's been vaccinated, no matter when you were vaccinated, you are eligible to register. Somebody's got to win. It might as well be us.
That's right.
That's a good public service announcement. The website is Ohio Vax-A-Million, Vax with an X, .com.
Because I'm registered.
Well, if you win,
Hi,
we'll-
can y'all hear me?
oh,
I can.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Jean Hall. And I was just agreeing, I didn't want to interrupt anybody, but I had worked in a poll. And when my first time working in a poll, I didn't know, that I'm not supposed to actually tell people, much of anything but how to vote. And when I want to show these people how to open up the booklet, this right before they got rid of the booklet. Well, the booklets that they had, everything was so backwards, right? Where it was just, when you put your paper down and you put, you clip it on the top with the little two holes. Well, everybody's paper was different from the voting book. So when you think you voting Democrat, you really voting Republican. And I just really thought that was so sad that they were tricking people like that to vote for Republicans. However, Republicans did win, but I was just too afraid. People were telling me that, oh, girl, you exposed that and this and that could happen to you. But it was just sad to see, like, everything was so rigged up. And it didn't take a rocket scientist to actually realize this, because I didn't know I shouldn't be looking at these papers that they were giving people to scratch in and fill in. But it was just so sad to see this.
So did that
and
we voted?
huh?
Did that
I
happen?
didn't hear you.
Did that happen to you when you voted yourself?
So when I voted myself, the book that I had was the same as the two different books. It was the same as one of the different books.
So certain people got this one book, okay? So when you put your paper on the clip, you're reading from the book and you're shading on the paper. Everybody that I had to help, their books were different. So when they put that shady mark in, you might think you shading in Democrat, you really shading in Republican. And each individual person that I helped, they all had different books.
So that might be something you'll want to discuss. Maybe you can send an email to the CUFA office and we can try to set up, I know I would like to ask a couple more questions, but we're out of time this evening. I want to thank our guests for coming and presenting to us some very enlightening and significant information as it relates to the redistricting effort. Thank you all again. Excellent presentation.
Yeah, man.
So just a quick reminder, you can come to our website about this and other issues that Communities United for Action works on at CUFAcincy.org. And on our YouTube channel, we've recorded this. It'll be on our website or Facebook. The links will be there. We've also got a meeting coming up next Thursday, June 10th, same time, 6:30 to 8 p.m. on Zoom to talk about this and kind of think about what we as an organization want to do to help support the effort to get fair districts drawn in our state. We, of course, like anyone who's on the call that's not a member to become a member. There are strength in numbers and there are strength in a larger group. The more of us there are, the more of an impact we can have to do things. And I want to repeat what I heard tonight, fairly. We need to do things fairly. And we need our society to be fair. Not that I'm going to go into a diatribe, but there are a lot of inequities in our society now that are becoming more exposed and actually more significant. But that's another evening. So thanks again to our guests. You can always call the CUFA office, 513-853-3947. Email CUFA@CUFAcincy.org. Please become a member, send us a donation. You can do that right on the website. And we just thank you all for coming again and presenting to us. And hopefully we will be available to support you in the future. Any final comments, Mary or Allison?
Thanks, all of you. And thank you, Clark, for chairing.
Okay. We can
Thank you
go.
so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. This was wonderful.
Blessings. And looking forward to meeting you ladies. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right now. Blessings.
Thank you
Thanks for a great
very much.
presentation.
Thank
Good
you.
night.